Hi. So this is a series that I'm going to do. It's about healing, and it's about also how we get there, how we get to the place of being so sick and so debilitated that we have to search for a way to heal. For me, my journey started, and I think for most of us, it all starts when we're young. And any traumas and things that happen to us and the way we're brought up to nourish our bodies, whether we're taught to rely on doctors and medical establishments, or everybody's different. Some people are raised with a lot of home remedies and herbs, and others are raised to go to a doctor or go to a drugstore and buy a bottle of something you know um, for myself, really didn't do a lot of relying on doctors. Went to doctors when you really had to, when you were really sick. Um, I I had a very, very strong inner voice, even as a little girl, and I did not like doctors. I didn't want to go to doctors. I didn't want to get poked by doctors. I fought it. And in fact, when they did the test and you had to get a blood test, I would not let them take blood from my arm. I think I went as long as I was until 18 years old. I would give them my finger and I'd say, "You want blood? You can take it from my finger." And I was stubborn. um, anyway, so I was also raised with very staunch English Scottish parents, and they came from an era of World War II and not having a lot and making do, and also the English diet is, well, at least was very, not a lot of fresh vegetables, although my mom did like fresh vegetables. But they did cook them, and they cooked them almost till they were dead. um, there was a lot of meat and a lot of potatoes. And although my mom was a very versatile cook and she made everything homemade, she did a lot of baking, and there was a lot of sugar involved, and there was a lot of white flour involved in a lot of what we ate. Um, and I was, I tended to be a kind of a plump kid. And what I know now is, my body was just building and building and building with mucus. But anyway, despite all that, I went through that. And then when I was 18 years old, my mom had gotten breast cancer when I was 15, and she died when I was 18. And that was a very major trauma for me in my life, and affected, my physical body, my spiritual body, my emotional body. Um, we don't, when we're young, especially, we're not taught this in any age. We're not really taught this, and people are starting to get this connection that when we're young and we have traumas that happen to us like that, that affects us physically. That affects every part of our bodies. And it's very important later in life to learn how to work on your trauma and release your trauma. So anyway, I had that happen, and I tended to, as a kid, I was sick a lot. I had mononucleosis, I had strep, I had pneumonia, I got a lot of that stuff. And, I now can see that my diet really was not conducive into fighting off things like that. And neither was I was a kid that was outside most of the time and playing, which was really good, but I didn't like school. I did what I had to do to get through school, basically. Um, but I also felt, I think, a lot of the tensions that were going on with my mom in the household. And anyway, as after she died, time went on. I was 20, just before I was 21, I was 20 years old, and I got hit by a car and I got knocked 30 feet down a cliff. And I hit the only tree in that 30 feet that stopped me from doing the whole fall down the 100-foot cliff. And I passed out. And when I actually hit the guardrail, and when I did, I actually snapped my femur. So I rolled all the way down the hill with a broken femur. And I wrapped around so many bushes and twigs and stuff that when I finally came to, I couldn't see the sky, because that was what I looked for. I looked for that so that I could get a bearing of where I was. So I didn't know. I questioned, was I in a hole, or where was I? I had no idea. Anyway, I remember, I'll never forget it, because I'm down in this place, and every time I tried to move, my bone, it had not come through the skin, so it would move, and I would pass out from the pain. It was just pretty excruciating. And so I finally figured out, after doing this several times, to just not move. And so I'm laying there, and I called for my mom. And I was just saying, Mom, I need help, because it also started to rain. So here I am down this place, God knows where, by myself in the dark, because it was 8 o'clock when I had left I'd been in a restaurant with friends, and I'd left there. So it was probably, 8:15, 8:20 when I got hit. And it was, I guess, apparently I laid down there for at least a couple hours before I really came to. And so I was talking to my mom, and, telling her, I need your help. And it was the most wonderful thing too, because my mom came to me. And I remember laying there and going, wow, okay, so what's death? Yeah, she's not physically the mother that I had in my life. It's not like I could grab her hand and take her home with me, but she was with me. So it was like, it really made me question, all these questions about death. So that became that whole little, rabbit hole to go down. But so I was really I was like so awed, because, I was like, wow, I needed you. And there you were. So I was talking to her, and while talking to her, a man was walking home from work, and I was actually down a side road, which was next to the freeway, which was not traveled very much. So the chances of having somebody find me was pretty remote. And of course, when the stars are aligned, the stars are aligned, and we all have a predestined ending to this story. And I guess my ending was not to die down there. I heard a voice say, "Is somebody down there?" And I yelled out, "Yes." And he just said, "I'll be right back." And he, I guess, ran home to call the fire department ambulance. And when he came back, another woman had drove up, and my moped was just resting against the guardrail, and my backpack had been thrown off my back and was in the middle of the road. So this woman stopped, and the man had come back, and together, she apparently worked at a hospital, but administration, and together they just knew there was a young person down there that needed help. And they climbed down to where I was. And when they showed up, I remember I thought, okay, I'm not in a hole. And anyway, they sat and they held my hands until the fire department came. And of course, at such a young age, and I was boy crazy, the fire department came, and I was surrounded by men. And to me, they were all gorgeous. And I was just like, wow. And then they started to cut my pants off. And I was like, oh my God, I was mortified. And luckily, as they got up to the top, I passed out again. So, but anyway, it was, they had to put me on a board and lift me up. And anyway, I went to the hospital, etc. And from that, I had hit my head. So I developed a hyperactive thyroid, which is actually a fast thyroid. A lot of women, as they get older, get slower thyroids, but this increased it. And so they had to put me on medication. Of course, the medication made me gain weight. And there was this constant battle up and down. But after about a year, I normalized and everything was fine. So I'd gone through the trauma of my mom dying, and my body wasn't in a peak performance place to start with. And then I went through this physical trauma. And then from then on, I went through, I had about 10, 12 accidents, car accidents throughout time after that. And I realized a lot of that was a punishment. There was a part of me that I connected to later that blamed myself, like, for not being a better child. That if I'd been a better little girl, that maybe that my mother wouldn't have had to leave and to die. And so there was this blame I was putting on myself. So there was all this stuff. And, and then I went through more physical accidents. I actually flipped a car. I went into a wall. I mean, I've done it all. It's kind of amazing that I'm actually, alive and well and walk and, talk and all the rest of it. Anyway, and then later on in life, I went through another issue where, and this I found out was hereditary, where I felt like I got in a mild flu, and I just felt rummy, and my stomach felt just a little off. I had absolutely no I had absolutely no appetite. But I had no fever. I had no other symptoms. And I remember I laid in bed all week. And by the end of the week, I started to feel better, and I got up and I went back to work. By then I was running my own business, and I was a hairdresser, and I stood all day. And then it happened again the next month. And this time I was actually living with my dad at the time, and my dad took off on a trip and went to Japan. He went to visit my brother. And so I was by myself, and I started not to feel good again. So I stayed in bed, and I had a dog, and I had a friend of mine walking my dog. And I remember I got to Thursday night, and I started to feel better. And I actually went for a walk with them both. And I was like, okay, I'm starting to feel better. And then the next morning, Friday, I got up and I stood up, and I passed a little gas, and I thought, oh, maybe that's the issue. And I remember I looked over on the ground to the left of me, and I saw myself. I had a vision, and I saw my body, and I was laying on the ground. I was in a fetal position, and I knew I couldn't move. I knew I couldn't get up. And it scared me. It really scared me. And I called a friend, and I asked her to take me to the doctor. And she must have heard something in my voice. She called an ambulance. And by the time the ambulance came, they thought it was an appendix, and then it moved on to the other side. And then they were like, uh-oh. And so they just rushed me into the hospital. And at the hospital, there was the surgeon. He was actually a gastrointestinal surgeon specialist. And he asked me a lot of questions. And next thing I knew something wasn't right, because he started offering me as much pain medication as I want. And he kept asking me if I wanted more. And I thought, this isn't a good sign. And I was I was in and out a little bit, drifting a little bit. And I remember something was really amazing. I could hear him on the telephone. He was around the corner, and he called the operating room. And the most amazing part was I heard them answering. So I believe now I had an outer body experience, because he was on the phone. I couldn't have heard them, but I did hear them. And he said to them, I need to bring her in now for surgery. And they told him that they were full and I would have to wait an hour. And he then told them that I wasn't going to be here in an hour. And I remember when I heard that, I thought, well, okay. I let it go. I let everything go. And I said, either I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be back with my beloved dog that I adored, that was having had all the same issues I'd had, and he had finally gotten better that I now was experiencing, or I would go and be with my mom. And at that point, I just let it all go. And they took me off and wheeled me off into surgery. It was a 6-hour surgery. I was actually brought out and then taken back in again. I believe I was actually starting to go septic. And so they were able to stop it. They took out, I think it was 5 organs. I had 2 carts. I have never had so many tubes in myself ever. I mean, I was sliced right down the middle. And it took quite a bit to recover and get better from this. Then I was back in my house recovering from this. Later, what I didn't know was there was black mold in my house. And it may have been there for a long, long time. Our house had been rebuilt in 2000 or 1999. I'm trying to think. Let me think. I think it was even before 1999. So, yeah, it was. So probably I'd say in the 1990s. So the house had been rebuilt, and from what I understand, some of it wasn't put in properly, the flashings, and there was water that had got into the walls. And anyway, there was black mold in that house, which I didn't know until later when I went to sell the house and I had the house worked on. They found mold and removed it. But what happened was, because I had this surgery and I was cut wide open in my gut and I laid in bed in that house, that gave the mold access into my body. And I was in such a vulnerable state receptive state to accept all the mold. So that you started working in my system. Although I got completely better from the surgery, and that's another story. I mean, my thyroid went whack. I had lost 70 pounds or 60 pounds from the surgery in one night, and then literally gained the weight back, where one week I'd put on 10 pounds, the next week I'd put on 15. It was all thyroid related. The doctor at the time that I went to see looked at me and said, "I know what it is. It's emotional." I basically looked at him and, thought to myself, "I'll show you emotional." And I stepped out of that office and went to an acupuncturist. Never went back I found a completely holistic doctor that helped me, and started to learn to heal myself through that. But so I had all this weight I'd lost, and then I put all this weight back on. So once I finally got healed, I then went through the process of, 6-month journey of releasing healthily all this weight, and which I did. And I got, what I deemed I was really healthy. I was walking 13 miles a day. I was exercising. I was working. I was doing really, really well. Mind you, I was still a hairdresser, so I was working with chemicals. There was still a lot in my life that I hadn't realized about the toxicity around me. I had about cleaning things in the house and whatnot, and detergents, but I didn't have it perfected. So anyway, this since I finally had this, got this weight off and everything was going smoothly. I had then a lot of stress in my life because my father, he started his journey to getting ready to leave. And I had to take care of him. And I mean, I wanted to take care of him, but I really had no assistance. My family really wasn't very helpful. And they didn't really seem to understand that what I did was a lot of work. I mean, I ran my own business, and after I'd been ill, I moved my business to my garage and had a little salon built there because I needed to be closer. They had told me I wouldn't be able to work the same way I could. I had to slow down a little bit. And so I did that. And then it was really effective for me to be there with my dad, failing. And, so I took care of the house. I took care of the bills because my dad got to a point where he just stopped paying bills and stopped taking care of all these things. And so, I had to take care of the maintenance of the house and, do all that and my own business and myself and him and feed him and care for him. And as time went on, he had to, you know, be on put on some diapers and, it's a difficult thing as we get older because, he didn't like what was happening to his body and he would have accidents and he would hide them from me, and I'd later find things, hidden in the closet that was, pretty awful. So there was a lot of stress and I did call in help. I got help to help me, which assisted me. But there was stress involved. And then he died. And now I'm a lot different at this point dealing with death than I was with my mother. But uh, it still was a definite stress. And I will tell you more on the next stream.